Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and before we jump into our story today, I want to make sure to remind you that you should like and subscribe to the podcast. Also, make sure you turn on the notifications in case an episode gets uploaded late or something. If you followed me long enough, you know that sometimes happens, so make sure you're turning on the notifications. And also, in the season of giving, make sure you're sharing this with other people that you know would love to hear about horrible humans in history. So, thank you so much, guys. And if you have any recommendations for me for any future episodes, please let me know. You can either message me on the podcast itself, so wherever you're streaming this from, you can leave a comment, or you can send me a message on Instagram or Facebook. I will take recommendations wherever I can get them because I love talking about who you want to hear about. So I will also give you a shout out, by the way, if you send in a recommendation. So today, buckle up because we are going to Madagascar. And the person we're talking about today is so fascinating to me. I could talk about her for a very, very, very long time. So this might be a little long, but she's just fascinating to me. So we're going all the way to Madagascar. And no, we're not talking about the movie or Dancing Lemurs or anything like that, but the actual real island of Madagascar, where a single queen ruled with fear, brutality, and total ironclad control. Today, our story is about Queen Ranavalona I, and if I pronounce that wrong, you won't know the difference, so that's fine. She ruled Madagascar for 33 years, and whose reign is often remembered as one of the most violent, paranoid, and isolationist in history. Some call her a tyrant, and some call her a nationalist hero who protected Madagascar from the colonization of Europe. Some call her one of the most brutal monarchs of the 19th century. So you'll have to listen to the story and decide which of those things she really is. So sit tight. We're heading to a royal court full of poison trials, political purges, human sacrifices, forced labor, and a queen who kept a grip on Madagascar and didn't let it go for 3 decades. Let's get into this. Now, Ranavalona is someone that we don't have a ton of details about her childhood because she was not born royal. She wasn't even born with much privilege at all. She came into the world around 1778, and she was the daughter of a commoner in the kingdom of Marina. But everything changed for her because of one moment. Her father happened to overhear a plot to assassinate King. Oh boy, guys, I have the pronunciation for this. Let's see if I can do it. It's a pretty long name. King Andri and Ompau in Mirian. I think I got that right. So I'm not going to say it again. And her father actually went and warned the king about this assassination plot. The king rewarded Ranavalona's father by adopting young Ranavalona. I'm going to keep changing how I say her name. Just accept it. He accepted her into the royal household as he basically adopted her and took her in as his own daughter. This move actually saved her life and raised her status, obviously, because now she's the daughter of the king, and ultimately put her in the direct line of succession Though at the time that all of this happened, when she was a young child, no one actually realized that this is what was happening. So growing up in the royal household, she wasn't trained like a typical noblewoman. She didn't receive a romantic education or a Gentile upbringing. Instead, Ranavalona grew up watching politics, betrayal, and the power plays up close and personal. She learned that people survived by being smarter and more ruthless and more loyal to themselves than to anyone else. Interesting thing for a child to learn. So, I mean, for a ruler, those are probably good if you want to stay in power, I guess. So she was later married symbolically to the king's son, Prince Radama, the heir to the actual throne. This was by no means a love match. It wasn't even a marriage in any meaningful emotional way. That's why I said symbolically. It was all political, which historically speaking is kind of the norm for most royalty at the time and leading up to this. Majority of marriages were political, not so much like the lovey-dovey romances that we see nowadays. Ranavalona was the first of his 12 wives. So Prince Radama had 12 wives. Yeah, 12. That's a lot. And marrying him, she officially gained royal status. Even though she had been the quote-unquote adopted daughter of the king, she didn't have any royal status until this point. But she was not Radama's favorite wife. I will point that out, nor even particularly notable among the many wives that he had. So she wasn't super highly regarded by her husband. But King Radama I ruled Madagascar from 1810 until his sudden death in 1828, so not super long. Officially, Radama died around the age of 36 years old. I forgot to tell you how old they were when they got married. I skipped that whole paragraph. Hold on, let me tell you. So they got married in 1810. Radama was 17 years old. And Ranavalona was 22 years old. So she was actually 6 years older than her new husband. So that was kind of a weird, rough age difference. And right after they got married, she started quietly building alliances and watched which officers were really loyal to her husband and which ones were not, which nobles whispered behind the king's back, and which factions felt really ignored. So that's important to know because he does pass away so suddenly in 1828. Like I said, he was around the age of 36 years old, and the most commonly accepted explanation for his death at the time was illness brought on by his alcohol use. So Radama was actually known to drink pretty excessively, especially later in his reign. European visitors and missionaries often would write in their diaries or in letters that he regularly consumed large amounts of rum and other imported alcohol. So in the weeks before his death, he reportedly suffered from fever, confusion, and physical weakness, symptoms that could align with a severe infection, alcohol poisoning, or liver-related illnesses. But it also could be poison. But we'll get there. His death was sudden, but not a shock to anyone close to him, given his lifestyle. Like I said, however, the circumstances left plenty of room for suspicion. Why was there suspicion? Because Radama had not named Ranavalona as his successor. In fact, under marina law and custom, she had no legitimate claim to the throne. The rightful heir was actually Radama's nephew, Rakatobi. Yet within days, possibly even hours of his death, Ranavalona actually secured the support of all the key military officers. Remember, she had been plotting this since they got married. Rakatobi, his nephew, and several other royal family members were executed, lickety-split, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And she crowned herself queen. The speed and efficiency of this takeover made a lot of people wonder if this transition had been planned before Radama had passed away. And I have done a lot of these episodes about rulers taking over and like suspicious people. She totally killed him. That is my professional opinion. She totally poisoned him, and there are reasons why I believe that. They will become very clear the more we talk about this woman. So, Radama was actively working with Europeans and missionaries and foreign advisors. Most of the people invited these changes, but Ranavalona was very against her husband's interactions with the Europeans and missionaries. When she took power, Ranavalona dismantled basically every single one of her husband's reforms. She deeply opposed his westernization policies and may have viewed him as a threat to Madagascar's independence. Because at this point in time, there were a lot of countries in Europe just taking over all of Africa, and she did not like that. And if Radama had actually lived just a little bit longer, it is very, very, very unlikely that Ranavalona would have ever actually become the ruler of Madagascar. And this is significant to note that poison, particularly plant-based poisons, were a known and accepted political tool in Madagascar at the time. Yeah. So there's that tidbit of information. Ranavalona would later rely heavily on, I'm going to pronounce this poison wrong, the Tangina poison trials. And we will get into those trials later. But she really heavily relied on the Tangina poison, showing that she was not morally opposed to actually poisoning people and using that as a form of judgment on people. So this led to some historians speculating that Radama could have actually been slowly poisoned, especially since symptoms of Tangina poisoning can overlap the illness with alcohol-related declines. So I personally believe that she poisoned her husband because she wanted the power. Just saying. Just saying. Now, here's something critical to note, though. There is no direct evidence that Ranavalona actually poisoned or murdered her husband, Radama. So there's no witnesses saying that she did it. No confessions were ever recorded. Not that she ever would. But a lot of people were very critical of her. So a lot of historians now think it's the alcohol-related illness or a natural death. But yeah, in other words, in my opinion, even if she didn't kill him, she was a little too ready in the moment that he died to take over his throne. So I think she was a little too prepared for it to be a coincidence. Now, interestingly, Ranavalona framed her rise to power as destined or divinely sanctioned. Again, motive. Yeah. She claimed the spirits of the ancestors actually favored her and that Radama had recognized her authority before his death, although there are no written records to support any of this. So she was just justifying her takeover through morality and spirituality. And she just took his death as a really great opportunity. Now, When King Ranavalona died, the transition should have been pretty simple in the power. But like I mentioned, Ranavalona wasn't supposed to be the heir. Ranavalona had a group of loyal officers that staged a really lightning-fast coup of the military, so the whole military supported her. The rightful heir was quietly executed, so his nephew. The legitimate successor under marina law was his nephew, Rakatobi, like I mentioned. And along with Rakatobi being executed, several members of the royal family and high-ranking nobles that posed a threat to Ranavalona's claim were also executed. Now, Ranavalona did not put Rakatobi on trial. She didn't exile him or force him into a religious confinement. She moved pretty quickly and decisively, and Rakatobi was seized almost immediately after Radama's death, and before any kind of support could rally around him, he was put to death by execution. Most likely strangulation or spear execution, aka just stabbing him a bunch with a spear, which were actually pretty common methods for eliminating high-status rivals. And his immediate family members and close supporters, including his mother, wives, children, and any other nobles, were also executed. Interestingly enough, for the women specifically, they didn't, suffocate them or strangulate them or spear them or anything. They just threw them in prison and let them slowly starve to death. So that's fun. They tried to carry these killings out very quietly and efficiently, so it all happened really quickly so the public wouldn't see it. And like I said, the women specifically were just thrown in a prison and forgotten about and slowly starved to death. And she purposefully didn't make it a public spectacle. Ranavalona's goal wasn't to terrorize the public at that moment. At that specific moment, she didn't want to freak anybody out. It was to remove every possible alternative to the claim of the throne. So she got rid of literally everyone. Because she didn't want his children to have a future claim on the throne. That's why they had to die. She didn't want any siblings or in-laws to rally other people around saying, look what she did. So she just got rid of all of them. And she understood exactly what she was doing. So she ordered the elimination of the entire rival line. And so ensuring that no one with a legitimate heredity could claim the crown from her. So Rakatobi, like I said, wasn't the only victim. His family wasn't the only victim. Several senior nobles who questioned Ranavalona's authority were executed, so you couldn't even question her. Military officials who hesitated to swear loyalty to her were removed or executed. Anyone connected to the previous succession plan was treated as a potential traitor. So she was a bit paranoid, you could say. And within days, possibly less than a week, there were no living rivals left that could change or that could challenge her legality to the throne. So she worked fast on that one. Now, Ranavalona claimed, like I said, the ancestors favored her rule because that was a great way to manipulate people into thinking, oh, if the ancestors are okay with it, then we should be too. The kingdom really needed stability, and the executions were necessary, according to her, to prevent civil war. In other words, she really thought that massacring all these political enemies was not personal ambition. It wasn't anything personal. It was just to stabilize the country. I guess that's one way of justifying killing lots and lots of people. To frame it like it will bring about stability. Yeah, I mean, I've heard arguments about that recently, so I don't know why people could think that was a legit thing to say, but she did. Now, this purge set the tone for her entire reign, as you can imagine. She would show no mercy for rivals, no tolerance for dissent, and she maintained her power strictly through fear and finality. Like, you mess with her, you gonna die. It also explains why no serious coups actually succeeded against her for 33 years. Don't worry, there were quite a few. But they never succeeded. Anyone who protested was also executed. So nobles who would resist, executed. It was just a clean sweep of anyone who doubted her. Ranavalona declared herself Queen of Madagascar, and the tone of her rule, like I said, became clear from day one. Oppose me, and you die. One of her first major policies, she reversed from her husband's rule, was the openness to Christianity. European missionaries had been making a lot of progress in Madagascar, and Ranavalona saw them as threats, foreign agents who would soften Madagascar for colonization. So in 1835, Ranavalona formally outlawed Christianity. Practicing it became treason. So some of the punishments, if you practiced Christianity or preached it or anything, would include execution, enslavement, forced labor, confiscation of property, and public humiliation. So refusal to renounce Christianity often meant that you were killed. Christians converted, or people who converted to Christians, were killed in many different ways depending on the status of the circumstance. Some of them were thrown off of cliffs. Yes, you heard that. Literally thrown off of cliffs. One of the most infamous methods. And I kind of want to explain that a little bit. So when I say they were thrown off a cliff, some of them were genuinely just thrown off a cliff. Others were actually tied up, thrown off the cliff to dangle off the side of the cliff, where they were slowly starved because no one could reach them. And eventually, the rope from them swinging around on this cliff would sever and they would plummet to their death. So their friends and family could watch them dangle and hang over the side of this cliff while they just waited to die. So that was one of the ways. The others were speared. Gotta throw those spears in there. Strangled, another fun one. And the last one is the Tanzania poison ordeal, sometimes disguised as a quote-unquote trial. I will explain that one in just a second. So all of these executions were often public, and they were designed to terrify others into abandoning their faith. Now, a few hundred Christians were actually executed at this time, but thousands more were punished, imprisoned, or killed indirectly from starvation and those kinds of things. The exact number of Christians that were actually killed in Madagascar at this time might not ever be known. Most modern historians agree that between 100 to 200 Christians were deliberately executed during the major persecution, especially between 1835 and 1861. You will sometimes see a higher number, but those usually mix in executions with deaths from forced labor, because a lot of them were forced into labor, or deaths during imprisonment from starvation or disease, or after consequences of punishments that they received, like beatings and that kind of thing. Ranavalona really liked torture, like medieval torture kind of things, so some of the punishments were kind of like that. Some of them also died of exposure. There was a lot of things that could have killed them. It wasn't necessarily just executions. So it's important to separate the intentional executions from the total Christian deaths. But a lot of Christians died. So It seems like, though, a lot more should have died of executions, because 100 to 200 is a lot, don't get me wrong, but we've talked about much higher numbers, right? It's surprising that she actually didn't execute more, but the reason is she wanted to eliminate Christianity, not necessarily wipe out every Christian. So that was the difference. She wasn't actually trying to kill people, she was trying to kill a religion. So many converts recanted publicly to survive, while others actually practiced in secret or fled. So a lot of believers renounced their faith to survive, or just hid their faith, basically. So as long as they didn't practice, they were safe. So Ranavalona preferred the fear and control over the mass slaughter in this specific case. So, and it's estimated that several thousands of Christians actually died overall. So it is a bigger number if you count overall number of Christians that were killed. But the persecution of Christian wasn't the worst part of her reign. That would be, we finally got to it, the Tanzania ordeal. So this might be the darkest part of her rule. So Ranavalona reinstated the Angina, that's it. Angina poison trial. This was an older Malagasy, they've got some fun names, practice where people accused of crimes, sometimes serious, sometimes petty, sometimes completely fabricated, were forced to swallow poison from the Tanzania nut, and were often forced to swallow 3 raw chicken skins at the same time. I know what you're thinking. Raw chicken skins? But why? Ew, gross. I mean, the poison's bad enough, but to have to swallow raw chicken skin? Ugh, gross. So, if you survived the poison, or if you threw up all 3 chicken skins, then you would be found innocent. So if you just took the poison and survived, you were innocent. If you took the poison and they forced you to eat the chicken skins, you had to throw up all 3 of the chicken skins. However, if you only threw up 1 or 2 of the chicken skins and not all 3 of them, you were found guilty. And if you didn't survive, so if you died of the poisoning, well, obviously you were guilty. But if you survived and didn't throw up those chicken skins, you were guilty, so you died anyways. They just killed you. So most people died no matter what happened. So during her reign, tens of thousands and possibly over 100,000 people were killed by the Tanzania ordeals. You could be accused of basically anything: witchcraft, theft, adultery, or simply offending the wrong noble. You could die for a rumor. Literally anyone could make up anything about you and you would get killed. Most of the people put through these trials, though, were put through the trials for disagreeing with the queen or wanting those foreign influences in Madagascar. Those were the main reasons. If there was any kind of dissent, you got put through these trials to make sure you weren't a traitor. And she really didn't like when people disagreed with her choices. So obviously they had to die. One of her largest projects was actually building and maintaining the Royal Road. Hundreds of miles of mountain paths were cleared by forced labor. So these are the labor camps that she had. Thousands died from exhaustion, starvation, or abuse. Similarly, her military campaigns, particularly against the coastal Sakalava people, drained the population. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Sakalava people. The soldiers to fight against the Sakalava people were not volunteers. They were conscripted, marched off, and very rarely returned. So who were the Sakalava people? The Sakalava were not just a single tribe, but a collection of very powerful coastal kingdoms that dominated Western Madagascar from the 17th through the early 19th centuries. So before Ranavalona, the Sakalava controlled major trade routes, which meant they controlled all of the coastal ports, slave trading networks, and foreign commerce. They also had strong ties to Arab, Africa, and European traders, which we know she does not like. They were also longtime rivals of the Marina, who ruled the Central Highlands. So that's Ranavalona's people, the Marina. Her late husband had already begun military campaigns against them, but Ranavalona continued and intensified these wars. The Sakalava represented the last major resistance to the Marina dominance. As long as they remained autonomous, Madagascar was fragmented. So they were split up, had different ideas of what should happen in Madagascar. Ranavalona believed unity could only be achieved through total submission. Obviously. Now, something super important you need to know about Ranavalona. We've kind of mentioned this, but she really believed in isolationism. She didn't just resist European influence, she practically shut Madagascar off from the rest of the world. All trade was tightly controlled. Foreigners were watched, restricted, or sometimes killed. Like we've mentioned, she believed Europeans wanted Madagascar as a colony, and in her mind, isolation was survival. And to be fair, she wasn't entirely wrong about the Europeans wanting to colonize, in the sense that her brutality really did keep Europeans away for decades. So she was right in trying to keep them out. She did well on that, but at what cost, right? So Ranavalona wanted to cut off foreign influence and redirect trade under royal control. So the Sakalava were a threat to Ranavalona because of these beliefs. Their leaders had frequent contact with the Europeans and Arabs, and she viewed the Sakalava as gateways for colonization, and she did not like it. So conquering them would mean sealing all of Madagascar's borders. So Ranavalona relied on Fauna Poana, aka forced labor and military service. So tens of thousands of men were quote unquote drafted, aka stolen. Many were poorly trained, poorly supplied, and desertion was punished by execution. She would go into entire villages and empty them out of all working age men that often never returned from their quote-unquote military service, aka forced military service. Now, Ranavalona in these wars used scorched earth tactics to defeat her enemies. If you're unfamiliar with what scorched earth means in the sense of battle, the Marina armies burned every village they came across to the ground. They just burned all of them, destroyed all the crops, confiscated all the cattle, raped without restraint, and took all the captives. The goal wasn't just victory, it was breaking the resistance permanently. When they actually captured the Sakalava people, they became slaves and were forced to work on all the royal projects. They were also relocated inland to weaken the coastal identity, so they wanted to destroy that culture as well. So this shattered the Sakalava political power and their culture. And Ranavalona also used executions in a strategic way. She would kill their leaders publicly. Some of the captives were executed as ritual warnings to all the others, and survivors were always paraded around when they came inland. So fear quickly replaced loyalty, And the wars with the Sakalava were devastating. Tens of thousands likely died from battle, famine, disease, and forced marches. The Madagascar population declined sharply. And I might have mentioned this already. By sharply, I mean by an estimated 50% by the end of her reign. She killed off half of her own people. Just absorb that for a second. Yeah. So coastal regions were depopulated and destabilized. She did this to her own people. Many deaths weren't from combat, but from exhaustion and starvation after defeat. So now I want to return to something a little less murdery and deathy and a little more housewivey, like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives or whatever that show is. Let's get a little more drama focused instead of death focused for a second. So Ranavalona had a very, very strange personal life. Despite her harsh rule, Ranavalona lived in extravagant luxury. She had silks, servants, palaces, lavish ceremonies. She had multiple lovers, some of whom she later executed for the smallest slights. Paranoia was everywhere. Why is that not shocking? With all the rulers that we talk about on this channel, paranoia is like key to their survival, I think. They weren't as paranoid as they were. I don't think they would last as long as they do. But anyways, no one was safe around her, not even her closest advisors. After becoming queen, Ranavalona followed an old Marena royal custom that allowed monarchs to take multiple companions, but she actually weaponized it in a way that very few rulers ever had. So, she took on multiple lovers. Most of her lovers were young men who were physically attractive and very strong. They were often military officers or court officials who had proven military or political loyalty. They were chosen for their loyalty and usefulness, but not romance, and their good looks, obviously. They had to have no powerful family who could challenge her reign. So if she accidentally got pregnant or something, they couldn't somehow claim a right to the throne. These were not equal relationships, obviously. To be her lover was publicly seen as a huge honor, but it was actually a way to be put in a position of extreme danger. Like, extreme danger. Refusing the queen was not an option for this. At first, her lovers were showered with gifts, given high-ranking court positions, treated as favored insiders, so she really lavished it on them and made them feel pretty powerful. But this favor was very temporary and very fragile. Like I mentioned, Ranavalona was very paranoid. And shocker, it's a common theme. Any sign of disloyalty, independent ambition, association with any kind of political rival, or even rumors of disrespect could result in an immediate execution. Many of her lovers were strangled, speared, poisoned, or got to go through the tangina ordeal, taking that poison in the chicken skins. Some were executed for alleged treason, never really proven. Others for infidelity. Yeah, that's right. Some of them were dumb enough to be unfaithful to the queen who can kill you any second. And some of them for no clearly recorded reason at all. She just had enough and was done, and they were done with life. So European observers noted that men who rose quickly at court often disappeared just as quickly. So if you saw a rising star in court, you knew that he would be gone pretty quick. The most well-documented lover was Adria Mahaja, a high-ranking noble and military officer. He was not just a lover, but also a trusted political advisor. For a time, he appeared pretty much untouchable. Like, no matter what he did, she kept him around. Some believed he might become her permanent consort. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, he was accused of treason. Ranavalona ordered his execution, reportedly by spearing, along with members of his family and associates. This sent a chilling message to all of the court. Closeness to the queen was not a way to be protected. It was exposure. Now, I should mention at this time that she actually does have a son. She had a son with her first husband before he passed away. This would become her heir to the throne when she was gone eventually. And he becomes pretty important in her story a little later. Now, you would think that all of this internal brutality, she'd run out of people to fight and she would be exhausted from all the fighting she's doing. No. Foreign powers also got a taste of Ranavalona's wrath as well. One of the most notorious conflicts was with France and Britain. Shocker. Shocker. Europeans who lived in Madagascar found themselves taxed, restricted, monitored, or in some cases imprisoned. Both countries attempted to pressure her into adopting Western laws and trade agreements, and Ranavalona basically told them to, you can't see it, but if you've watched Friends, you know the sign, the double fist pump sign, and said, absolutely not. You know. She told them to, in nice terms, go away. There was even a failed French-led invasion attempted that ended disastrously for the French. So she was kind of kicking trash all over her peoples, all the foreign trash. She was kicking all of it. But despite the chaos and bloodshed, Ranavalona remained untouchable. No coups succeeded, and there were a few of those. There were quite a few coups that were staged against her, and a few of them were actually by her own son. She forced her son's friends to go stomping through the forest, and they all died of malaria, but she did not kill her own son, miraculously. And me telling you that also reminded me of a thing that she did. She wanted to go on a buffalo hunt, and so she arranged for a military escort to go on this buffalo hunt. And I think the documentary I watched said that 10,000 men died of illness or starvation while on this hunt that I think was a month or so long. I can't remember. I should have written all of this down, but I didn't. But they killed 0 buffalo on this trek. So they stomped around in the malaria-ridden forest, and lots of people died, but no buffalo to show for it. And Ranavalona didn't die. She was totally fine. But that's what she did with her son's friends, is made them stomp around in the malaria-ridden wastelands of the country, and they all ended up dying. So no rebellions lasted against her. Her intelligence network kept her very well informed of what was going on in any plot that arose against her. She ruled as an unshakable, explosive, paranoid force of nature, and she held on to power for 33 years. Now, Ranavalona was never captured. She was never overthrown. She didn't face any kind of trials. She was never accused of crimes against humanity, which always existed but wasn't a thing until, a lot later than her time. Anyways, she just simply died of old age. Yep. In 1861, at around 82 years old. Very astonishingly old for that time period. And especially old for someone who ruled through constant political threat. Lots of coups. tried against her. She lived to be 82 years old. She passed away peacefully in her palace, which is so wild to me, because after killing half of her own people, she got to die peacefully. Her death was met with relief, as you can imagine, across the entire island. The new king, her son, Ranavalona II, immediately reversed her isolationist policies and welcomed European influence. Christianity was again tolerated. The Tanzania ordeal was abolished. Forced labor projects were scaled back. Notice I said scaled back, not eliminated. So, side note there. Her son spent years undoing most everything she had established. Even though his own reign was short and chaotic, he worked really hard to undo everything that his mother had done. Ranavalona's legacy remains complicated. Some see her as a brutal tyrant who ruled through fear and slaughter, and others see her as a nationalist who held Madagascar independence during the peak of European imperialism. And in this instance, both of these things can be true. She was violent, paranoid, and merciless, but she also preserved the Malagasy sovereignty for decades longer than many of the other African nations managed to do. She was in every sense a queen who refused to bend. But what do you think? I want to know what you think. Was it worth the cost of her own people's life to be so isolation focused, to try and preserve that by killing majority of your people? Should she be seen as a hero for trying to preserve that, or for succeeding in preserving that for a short time because eventually it did happen? Or do we see her as a monster for the brutal things that she actually did? It's a genuine question, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this. I think she was kind of both. She was a monster. She had motivation to preserve things that she held sacred, but clearly didn't hold the lives of people as one of those things that was sacred. So I think she's both a monster, mostly monster. But I want to hear what you think. Like, what do you think of her? And should she be considered a hero at all? And that is the story of Queen Ranavalona I, a ruler who proves that history is never simple, and the line between monster and protector is sometimes razor thin. So, if you enjoyed this episode of HHH, don't forget to like and subscribe, and please share this with everyone you know. It really helps me out because I love seeing how many people are listening. I love sharing these stories with lots of people. So please make sure you're sharing this if you really enjoy it. It helps our show more than you could ever imagine. And like I said, I always do this for fun. Like I said a lot also. I'm sorry. I realized that as I was talking today. I do this podcast for fun, but I want to enjoy this with as many people as possible. So please share this. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, send them my way. I actually checked the calendar for next week, guys. I know, shocking. I looked at something ahead of time. So there will not be an episode next week. It's Christmas, and that came way too quickly. So since it's a holiday, we won't have a new episode next week. It'll give all you slackers a chance to catch up on any of the episodes you've missed. And don't worry, I consider myself a slacker because how long did it take me to get another episode out? Like, we're not even going to talk about that. So, but our next episode that we're going to be talking about someone millions of people are taught to worship, even now to this day. And a lot of people do think this person is just so amazing and so fantastic. But he is actually a ruthless killer. Thank you, Jason, for this recommendation. We are going to be talking about Mao Zedong. And if you don't know much about this man, I highly recommend listening. because he is a monster. And I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas. We will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks again for listening. So glad you guys are here with me, and we will see you in 2 weeks.